This presentation is about stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder engagement is a broad subject, and this e-learning presents the theory, recognizing that there are many real-life challenges that may be difficult to overcome. We have therefore included some concrete and real-life examples throughout this course. These will not, however, provide a solution to every challenge faced. This e-learning provides the perfect world view of what stakeholder engagement is and how it should be executed. But it is fair to say that no national standards body applies every single principle to the letter. One important logistical point about this e-learning. There will be a few terms and acronyms mentioned throughout the presentation that are secondary to the presentation, but which are important to understand to fully grasp the context of what is explained. In such cases, either a definition or a link to where you can obtain further information will be provided. Before we launch into the theory about stakeholder engagement, it's key to review why stakeholder engagement is so important. Involving stakeholders helps ISO to develop standards that meet market needs. This ensures ISO's relevance, competence, and credibility. At the core is the notion that ultimately it will be the stakeholders who use the standards, so the only way to make sure that they meet their needs is by involving them. Hence the statement, by stakeholders, for stakeholders. If there is one thing that we would like you to retain from this e-learning, it is the fact that the ISO system is not concerned with national standards bodies think about standards in development or published. What is key is what stakeholders think of them. A stakeholder can be defined as an interested party. It's basically an individual or a group that has an interest in any decision or activity of an organization. Some of the organizations that could be of interest include industry, professional, and technical associations, consumer and community interest groups, employee representative bodies, government organizations, manufacturers, importers and suppliers, regulatory and controlling bodies, research and academic institutions, union and employee organizations, just to name a few. In some countries, there are lists or almanacs available about various types of organizations. This can be a useful starting point in identifying potentially interested stakeholders. In a survey conducted by the Technical Management Board, many of the national standards bodies responding mentioned that they had stakeholder categories that they use as a type of checklist to ensure that they did not forget any potentially interested stakeholder. As an aside, I'd mention that since September 2012, national standards bodies are required to indicate in the global directory which of the stakeholder categories the experts they nominate to working groups belong. These stakeholder categories are industry and commerce, government, consumers, labor, academic and research bodies, standards applications, and non-governmental organizations. That's not to say that national standards bodies don't have a critical role to play. They are the platform for the pen. They provide the infrastructure needed for developing standards. For example, national standards bodies facilitate and manage standards development, distribute and maintain standards, receive requests for new projects, and of course identify stakeholders and coordinate their input. So the national standards body is involved in many aspects of standardization, many of which have nothing to do with ISO. However, in relation to national standards bodies' contribution to ISO work, the last point is the focus of this e-learning. Before we launch into the theory about stakeholder engagement, we should point out that we used as a basis for this e-learning a guidance that was prepared by the ISO Technical Management Board. For information about the ISO TMB, we would encourage you to go to www.iso.org and search under Technical Management Board. The guidance was prepared in 2010, and it contains principles on stakeholder engagement and provides guidance for their implementation. It was prepared following a survey of over 100 ISO national standards bodies, to which 41 responses were received. It asked national standards bodies to provide information about their policies and practices about stakeholder engagement. This guidance is available on ISO Online at the link provided on the slide. And also available there are a number of links to additional resources that address stakeholder engagement. In particular, we'd highlight the companion website to the TMB guidance, which includes excerpts of NSB policies on the various principles of the TMB guidance document. So now we're ready to launch into stakeholder engagement. There are essentially two cases in which stakeholder engagement comes into play. The first is when you receive a proposal from ISO for a new field of work, or you have identified your national priorities and need to decide in which committees to become engaged. The latter part might be of greater interest to national standards bodies who have recently joined ISO and who are still determining in which ISO committees to become involved. But both of these are lumped into one because in both cases they are new areas to you and you must decide whether you wish to be engaged. The second case is where you are already involved in an ISO committee and you must decide on your level of involvement on a new work item presented in that committee. The process and of course national standards bodies' obligations will differ in both of these cases, but many of the principles for stakeholder engagement will be the same. They will just be applied to slightly different ends. So now let's look at how these cases play out. In case 1, where you have a new field of work or national priorities and you want to decide in which ISO committee to become involved, you should first look at whether you have an existing national structure. In other words, do you have a committee at the national level working on standards in related fields? If yes, you should consult the stakeholders of the committee. If no, you will have to find stakeholders and consult to determine whether there is a national interest in the work. If there is no interest, no participation in the work is warranted. If you have an existing structure and the stakeholders indicate that they are interested, you can use the existing structure as your national mirror committee. This is a committee that reviews the work of the ISO committee in your country. Even if this is the case, however, you may still have to seek additional stakeholders. If you have no national structure and the stakeholders you consulted indicate an interest, then you should form an NMC. In both cases, whether through a new or existing structure, these would select national delegations to the ISO committee. In case 2, you have already indicated that you wish to participate in a committee as a P member. You therefore hold a P membership. The National Mirror Committee should already be established, and any new work item proposal can be run through this NMC. The stakeholders should already be part of the committee, though it may be necessary to reach out to get more stakeholders. Through the stakeholders, they will either disapprove or approve involvement in the work item, in which case you would nominate an expert to participate in the elaboration of the working drafts. Of course, the key distinguishing element between case 1 and case 2 is the fact that as a P member of a committee, you are required to vote.